Welcome to this special MG podcast. We're here today to do an interview with Charlie Cook from Rightcharge. His company is a comparison site where you can compare electric car charge points and also electric tariffs for your home. So I thought it'd be of interest to everyone on MG and also to the wider population. So first of all, Charlie, thank you for coming on our podcast. Can I just ask you to explain a bit about yourself, your history, and the company Rightcharge that you've set up?
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for having me on. Thanks so much. Background for me, actually, I was a civil engineer like a long time ago. So, basically steel and concrete was my life for a little bit. But always had an interest in the climate space, and then started studying it as well and really got stuck into the challenge and the kind of opportunities, I suppose, off the back of that as well. I then found myself working in the early days at Octopus Energy. So that was 2017 I started at Octopus. And obviously they have become a big name in the energy space, and at the same time have sort of been doing all sorts of brilliant things around the area of energy, the area of electric cars, and particularly charging. And so my role was to work on a lot of the charging solutions back at Octopus. And whilst I was there, the market changed very quickly, and we went from a situation where an electric car driver might have 4, possibly 5 options when it came to which charge point to install at home, and the differences between them weren't dramatic. And then from an electricity tariff perspective, there were basically the old school sort of like economy 7 tariffs, which gave you some off-peak periods, but they weren't as advantageous from a cost perspective as the new EV tariffs are today. So between then and now, there's been a huge shift in the market. And drivers now have an enormous range of choice when it comes to which charge point to install at home, what features they might want to focus on. And then from an energy tariff perspective, it's got a lot more interesting because there's far more EV specific tariffs in the market now for drivers, but also a lot more complex because comparing those tariffs versus a normal tariff is very difficult if you don't have the right tools. So we built those tools at Rightcharge, and we have a charge point comparison that gives a recommendation for the right charge point, connects you to a trusted installer, and then also gives you the ability to accurately compare EV specialist tariffs and switch to one that will save you money, save you a few £100 potentially when the tariff market conditions are right, and also help you to save carbon, because if you're charging overnight, then you're actually charging on slightly cleaner electricity as well. So yeah, that's us. That's Rightcharge.
Okay, cool. And so how's Rightcharge funded? Are you independent from the energy companies and the charger installer companies?
Exactly. Independence is always going to be a really important part of the business. We want to be an actor in the market that can always give independent and impartial advice to consumers, both on the charge point and the tariff. So we're not affiliated. We're not funded by any of those businesses, and we're very careful not to introduce anything that would conflict our information to drivers. So yeah, we have commercial relationships with the installation companies. That's our business model, but it doesn't influence the choice we give to drivers or the price that drivers have available to them.
Cool. Okay. So you're saying before that the EV home charger market has expanded over the past few years. We've gone from being a couple of key players. I remember my first charger I had installed in my house was installed by British Gas.
Yeah.
Back when the government used to pay for everything on the charger install. The market's changed quite markedly. There's a lot of new operators, a lot of more independent companies now. How do you see that? Obviously, you cover a wide number of brands on your website. Are there more coming all the time? Is it developing? Are there more features? What's going there?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is maybe like 2 or 3 years ago, in fact, when I started the company, there was a question which was, we've seen this expansion of options and expansion of variety of technologies. So like you said, back when you got yours installed in the early days, there were only 2, 3, 4 manufacturers, 4 brands potentially that had chargers at all. And within them, the technology was probably fairly similar. these days you have, charge points now that are specializing in like the solar integration bit in the market. You have others that are maybe aimed more at the lower end or basic end. They still will do smart charging scheduling, which is actually becoming a regulatory requirement from June anyway. So that should always be the case. And then up to like the upper end of the market where you've got like premium options, and sometimes it's customers are more interested in the aesthetics than the features of the unit. And so when I started the business, there was a question as to, are we going to see this space consolidate and see it sort of become one, maybe two major players? If anything, what we've seen is that variety still exists, and it, actually probably even more so than it was a couple of years ago. And I don't think we're going to see that change, if I'm totally honest. I think there's enough differences between the products from a technical and an aesthetic perspective that there's like different people, different drivers, subsets of the market that will want different things, and I think we'll see sort of variety is here to stay.
Cool. Okay. And one of the things I guess that's changed for me, when I got my first charger installed, it was a tethered Type 1 charger for a Nissan Leaf. And then there's been a change, hasn't there, where most cars now work on a Type 2 charger. And so, I think 2012, I had a Type 1 tethered charger fitted. I then moved house in 2015 and had a untethered Type 2 socket. And then I moved house again in 2019, and my new charger now is the Anderson A2, which is on your site. And that's a tethered Type 2. So if people are sort of, if they're coming into this for the first time, would you say go for a tethered Type 2, or would you still think that an untethered gives you a bit of flexibility? What would be your thoughts on that?
It's the ideal question to ask straight up. And I think like for drivers, it's probably one of the first things to think about. The way that we talk to drivers about it is obviously understanding the Type 1, Type 2 change in cars is quite an important thing to introduce people to. So we just say, look, sort of 2017, 2018 or older vehicles will have this Type 1 socket, whereas almost everything that's newer than that has the Type 2 now. So the only question to ask yourself is, am I ever going to want to charge a 2017, 2018 EV or earlier at home? If the answer's no, then we basically just recommend tethered Type 2 because it's convenient, basically. And we did a poll. In fact, we did a survey of drivers to ask them. I think the way we framed it was, if you were talking to a friend, what would you recommend today? Tethered versus untethered. And the sort of general consensus was, if you're not ever going to if you're not going to charge an older vehicle, just go tethered because it's just so much easier. Basically you only have to plug one end in when you get home, right? As opposed to both ends of the cable.
Yeah, I think for me, the advice I give family and friends is, if you happen to be buying a used Nissan Leaf, for example, that's on Type 1 now, get an untethered Type 2 charger, because then that's going to see you through in the future. If you're getting anything newer than that and you don't foresee that you'd ever want to buy an older car, then like you say, just go for a tethered Type 2 because it's going to see you all the way through. So, and it is a lot easier to just have a cable attached rather than have to get a cable out your boot, plug it in one end, plug it in the other end. Then when you're finished, take that wet cable and put it in your boot with you and take it with you. It's better if you just leave it stuck to your wall. It works a lot easier.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think you can summarize it, can't you, as if you've got a Type 1 car, definitely get untethered. Don't get a tethered Type 1.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah.
And then if you've got a Type 2 car, you're probably okay with a tethered Type 2, but just be aware that maybe, if someone visits you and they've got an older vehicle and they want to charge, you can always do it off the 3-pin socket, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of thinking about it.
Cool. As well, obviously, back when I got my first charger, it was just sort of 3 kilowatt, 16 amp chargers that they were installing as standard. And I think part of that was due to, well, I guess, the fuse size that customers have got in the house and things. Yeah. Now, with a bigger battery that cars have nowadays, the new MGZS EV's got a 73 kilowatt hour battery. So on a 3 kilowatt charger, that would take like nearly a full day to charge. So
Yeah.
obviously there are, a preference now to go for a 7 kilowatt charger at home. Are there any common issues which customers find when they're trying to get a home charger installed that might prevent that might stop that from happening as easily?
None of the chargers that we have on the site, and this has been the case for a while, are 3 kilowatt. So everything is 7.2 technically. And I don't think there's ever a reason these days why you need to be limited to a 3 kilowatt. And that's because load balancing has just become so easily available with charge points. And I guess for those who haven't heard that phrase before, it's essentially charge points with load balancing are able to understand how much power is being used in your home at any one time. And then they also know what your fuse limit is. So let's say you've got like a 60 amp fuse in your house, the charger knows that you're using 40, 45, 50. And if the charger notices that your power consumption in the home is approaching that 60 amp limit, then it will dynamically and temporarily reduce power to your car, and then wait for your, turn your oven off or turn your electric shower off or whatever it is, and then you can bring that power back up again to the vehicle. So that's become quite a common, I guess, feature of chargers. We actually talk about it as fuse protection on the website, and that's just because we felt like load balancing was quite a technical industry term that wasn't as intuitive. So we've reframed it as fuse protection, because at the end of the day, that's what you're doing, is you're protecting your home's fuse. The website is actually designed, so if you run through the charge point comparison journey, it will ask you 3 questions, and one of them is will you be getting a second? Would you think you might get a second EV or third EV on your driveway in the next 5 years? And if you think you might, then the website actually recommends that you look at a charger with fuse protection, because as well as it being a solution to exactly what we just talked about, it's actually something that's going to be fundamental if you ever want to get a second charge point installed. So, if in 2-3 years down the line, you're like, okay, actually, I've got 2-3 cars, it'd be useful to plug them both in at the same time. I'd like to get a second charge point. If you chose the first one without fuse protection, then you're going to have to rip it off the wall and put another one in that does have that feature. So instead of having to spend 900 quid, £1,000 on a second charger, you're actually going to have to spend close to $2,000 to get them both fitted right. So the website's designed to try and help people not make that mistake up front, I guess, and just make sure they're future proofed, so that there's no unnecessary costs in the future.
Yeah, so it is perfectly possible to perhaps get a second charger, but obviously if you've got a 60 amp home fuse, you're not going to be able to have 2 32 amp car chargers and do anything at all in the house. So you're going to have them all sort of turned down effectively. And then maybe when one car finishes charging, then the other one will automatically increase the charge rate and things, sort of do like a dynamic load share.
Precisely.
So that's what that comes on to. There are other issues I've seen with some customers where they've had looped supplies at home. Could you sort of explain what a looped supply is?
So it's one of the reasons that sometimes installs can get delayed. And essentially it means that your home electricity circuit is in a certain way connected to your neighbors. And that would have just been something that happened with a certain percentage of the homes built in the UK, and I think it's relatively low. I think in some areas it's higher, because there will have been building practices that were common in certain regions of the country and then not in others. I've heard that, I think it's the northwest or northeast, it was quite common. So if you're in that region, you might find that you do have a loop supply. Whereas in other areas, it can be less common. I've heard that it's up to 20-25% homes in some regions are looped.
Yeah, so in the northwest, where a lot of my customers are from, I think it was a sort of practice. It was typically sort of 1950s to 1980s, where if they built a semi-detached house, they basically put one cable going to the left-hand house, for example, and then a jumper cable going across to the right-hand pair of the semis. So effectively you've got, your house on the left has got, I don't know, 100 amps going into that, or 120 amps, but then there's a break off with 60 going to next door.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you're in the other half of the semi and you want to use a car charger, you've got a very limited supply. It might be better to get unlooped, because you're going to put an awful lot of strain on that initial cable going up to the first house. So
Exactly.
In the case of my customers where it's happened, they've had to basically, the energy company, the DNO, has come and dug up the front garden and put a new cable in, which sounds a bit drastic, but actually, with the way that houses are going to need more electricity going forward, and particularly if we move on to air source heat pumps and things like that in the future, I think it's a good idea to get it unlooped now. If I know some people are reticent because they go, I've just had a new driveway fit, or I spent ages putting that garden down, or whatever it is. But actually, for the depth of a spade's width, whatever, trench going across your garden, which can get covered over afterwards, to unloop your house, I think it's really worth doing. And that's something that the installers would advise you of, isn't it?
That's right. It is. But at the same time, we just try to make sure drivers are aware that it could be something that happens. And also that if it's something that they could either bring up with the installer initially, or along with like potential smart meter upgrades, they could proactively get in touch with you mentioned the DNO there, so the distribution network operator, which is basically like saying the local electricity grid operator, right? So the first step for a customer is to find out who their DNO is, and that's, you can do that with a Google search. But it is quite a smart move if you're thinking about getting a charger, is to reach out to your DNO first and ask them whether they would recommend a fuse upgrade, or B, suggest that you'll need your supply to be delooped. So it's a bit of a hack, I guess, to kind of get ahead and keep your install lead times to a minimum. We are actually actively working with one of the DNOs, UK Power Networks, on a project called Skyline, and it's essentially it's to kind of try and tackle this problem, and try and encourage drivers to kick off that sort of electricity check earlier in the journey, so that it doesn't become a blocker to their install, and avoids any issue where they perhaps would like to have a charger installed in a week, but can't get it for a month or 2 months because they've got to have either a fuse upgrade or often is what takes more time is the de-looped situation.
Yeah, the groundworks, arranging all that, getting a guy in to come and dig a trench and so on. Yeah,
exactly.
But the cost is usually covered by the DNO, so it's not necessarily that it's going to cost the car owner, the house owner, anymore. It's just that it could add the time factor on there, really. So
it's predominantly about the time factor. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Now, obviously, your website is set up, from what I've seen myself when I've been on it and tried it. You compare the home charge points, it asks you a series of questions, what car you've got, whether you've got solar panels, that sort of thing. And then it gives you a list of charger suggestions based on that. And then you can look at further ones, which, if you will. Now, do you find customers are always looking for the cheapest price on there, or are they more conscious of perhaps, that they might be paying an extra £100, but they've got this feature or this feature? And what sort of priority do customers give to those features?
You know what's really interesting? So we looked at this recently, and we did some sort of just research into what were the common choices pre and post a change to how we display the information on the website. So the way the website used to work was you would see a list of charge points available in your area, but they were ordered from lowest price to most expensive. And then we updated the site so that we asked those questions, those 3 questions you mentioned. And that's about, are you going to be charging at home overnight? Are you thinking about having solar on your roof? or do you have it already? And then the other one we mentioned earlier, which is you have a second or third EV on the drive in the future. And each of those questions is linked. Behind that is a recommended feature. So if you're charging at home overnight, we'd recommend a charger that can schedule and recommend switching tariff to take advantage of off-peak prices. Obviously, solar, you've got charge points that will essentially integrate with your solar panels and can read when that generation goes up and divert that power to your car. And then the last one we discussed with fuse protection. So then all of a sudden the results, instead of being cheapest to most expensive, were actually most suitable charger for your requirements, down to least suitable. When they were purely price driven, I think it was I want to say 70% of users chose the cheapest or the second cheapest option. When we made that change for it to become about personalized recommendation, 60% of users chose a premium product. So the majority of users are now choosing what you might describe as premium products. So typically that's 100, 200, 300 pounds more expensive than the base level charger. And I think probably what we're seeing there is just I think new drivers appreciate that insight into why these features are actually valuable. So that was quite nice, because I think it shows that recommendation is useful, I suppose, to people.
Yeah, because nothing worse than buying cheap, buying twice. You don't want to get something and think, oh, well, I say in the case of, if you'd chosen one that didn't integrate with solar and then you decided because of spiraling costs you wanted to get solar, to then have to put another £1,000 or more into a charger to replace the one you'd already got because exactly. You didn't know about that feature originally. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, exactly. And we've seen examples of customers coming to us with that exact situation. So yeah, we hope that anyone who uses Rightcharge will never be in that position. They get the right charger first time. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Now there are some changes happening to the home charger grant from the 31st of March. That will basically stop the £350 grant for the majority of people. Can you just run us through those changes? Are you able to just give us a rundown of what's changing and sort of some of the deadlines, really?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the home charge point grant really that we're talking about here. Obviously, there's the workplace grant as well, but it's the home charge point grant that's changing predominantly. So OZEV, the government body who administer it, are refocusing that grant so that actually it becomes available to people who live in apartment blocks, also landlords who are registered as businesses, and essentially taking it away from owners of domestic properties with driveways, which, as you say, that was the majority of grants were going to people who own their own home, had a driveway, got a charge point installed. So that the grant's ending for those people, and it's ending on the 31st of March. But in order to access it, you actually need to have your charge point installed before the 31st of March, which isn't obviously something that's always entirely in your control. For the reasons we mentioned earlier, you could find out that you've got a loop supply, or you might need to get a fuse upgrade. And so those factors mean that actually we're already kind of in a position where, if you're looking to get a charge point, then you should kind of kick that journey off as soon as possible. And basically, we as Rightcharge will no longer be showing charge points with the grant applied, prices with the grant applied from February the 1st. And that's basically because once we get into February, we're not going to be able to have confidence that every customer will get that charge point installed before the end of March. So what we don't want to happen is for customers to see a price that's £350 cheaper, and then all of a sudden
an additional bill. Yeah.
There's delays, and then they have to spend so much more money, right? So I suppose, I think the message is, if you are a homeowner with a driveway, get your process started now and you should be okay. But within a week or 2 weeks, it might start to get harder, basically, to get that installed.
Okay, and just for anyone watching this video, underneath the video, we've got a link, a URL that you'll be able to click on that, and that will take you through to Rightcharge, and you'll be able to follow the process as Charlie's explaining. But yeah, no, I mean, this is, I think it's really important. I think it's, well, in some ways, I can sort of see the arguments from the political point of view, and that, you know, if somebody's got a £450,000 detached house and a driveway, do they need the £350 grant for a home charger when their house has gone up by 50 grand in the last year as it is? You know, so I can sort of see politically, you know, that there might be less demand, less reasoning for offering that discount to people who are homeowners, and perhaps people who are in tenanted properties or flats are ultimately probably more deserving of that additional help, particularly when they're not going to necessarily benefit from the charge themselves in terms of house value. You know, it's the landlord that would benefit in that case.
I think you're absolutely right, Miles, and I guess just maybe quickly on that point as well. I think what's perhaps a bit missed in policy right now, and hopefully something comes to market, but is that when the used car market gets bigger, all of a sudden we'll be talking about people who aren't used to buying 30, 40, 50,000 pound cars. They're used to spending 5, 10, 15K, right? And if you're spending £5,000 on a used vehicle, but it costs you almost £1,000 up front to get a charge point installed, that's like quite a significant increase in cost. And so,
totally, yeah.
I would hope that there's a government solution for that market to spur that along. But in the absence of a government solution, you know, we already have a partner, and that's about their offers available through our website, who will install a charge point for zero upfront cost, and actually you get it on a subscription model. So basically like paying for a Netflix subscription. It's £30 a month, which gets you the charge point and the installation, but then an ongoing premium maintenance service. So if anything goes wrong, they have a 2-day guarantee. They'll come out and make sure you're fine. And by the time you get to the point where that charge point needs to be replaced, so long as you continue to pay the subscription, they'll replace it for free. So there are, there's that offer, and there's some funded solutions coming to market that mean that it might be possible to avoid the upfront.
Yeah, I mean, that subscription model that you've explained, that sounds pretty game changing, really, compared to lots of competitors. Because, like you say, once the £350 grant goes, the charge points are going to be what, like £900 minimum, based on the current. So, I mean, do you see that the prices are likely to go up in the short term by £350? Will competition start to drive prices back down? Do you think that has there been some artificial inflation in the marketplace because of the grants? Do you think, or not?
Do you know what? Obviously, that's always been suspected. I've seen it theorized on forums, but I've never seen evidence of that. I think it's always been quite a competitive market, and I think manufacturers and installers are operating on pretty low margins. However, if maybe we'll see the lowest cost charges go up by 300 instead of 350. So maybe there's like 50 quid in there that sort of comes out of it as it becomes even more competitive. But I wouldn't be expecting to see a lot more than that.
No. Okay. Speaking of prices and going up and things, my electric tariff, I'm with Octopus on their Go Faster tariff, and it's due to end middle of April. There will be quite a few people, I guess, who've had their EV, maybe watching this podcast had their EV for a couple of years now. They may have been on a similar tariff to me, or on a low rate tariff. It's coming to an end. What can we do? I mean, is there anything that that homeowners can do at the moment in terms of energy prices? Any way that they can mitigate it?
So maybe the only concrete bit of advice I can give is do look around, do your homework. And the reason that it's difficult to give any other concrete advice right now is because, you know, we're literally talking to energy suppliers today, and the pricing's not even solidified, and it will continue moving. So it's tough to say exactly what's going to happen. But the large sort of themes are that the price cap is the energy tariff price cap is increasing from 1st of April. The expectation is that that will go up by something like 50%, so significant amount. And there's also an expectation that 6 months later, because the cap gets reviewed every 6 months by Ofgem, the governing body for energy. And there's an expectation that in September, the cap will go up again. So I think doing a research, seeing what offers are available before the cap increases is wise. And instinctively, it feels like the best options are going to be probably from fixing rates for longer terms. So if you can fix for 12 months, great. If you can fix for 24 months, it might even be a better solution. And you'll probably see that those 24-month tariffs give you better rates right now than the 12-month tariffs. But the variable tariffs are unlikely to be good value as these caps go up in April and September.
Yeah, I was on Octopus Agile tariff up until April last year, and because it was great all through 2020, it was, through first lockdown, I was being paid to use electricity. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
And then it sort of, as we came out of lockdown, energy prices started to rise, gas prices went up, which caused a knock-on. And then I think Agile tariff it was basically like flatlining at 35 pence, which is their like maximum rate they were charging on Agile.
Yeah.
Pretty much, all day long. And then there was a little blip in the evening when it went down by a couple of pence and it went back up again. And I was like, no. So I'm been on to Octopus Go faster. So I'm paying like 5.5 pence off peak for 5 hours and 13.3 pence peak. And I'm looking at tariffs now and just thinking, all the costs are signaled to go up like sort of 3 times what I'm currently paying. I think the Octopus Go is like, I think they're offering a 9 pence tariff or something like that on Go in my area. Or 7.5, is it?
7.5 for the off-peak rate.
Yeah, but then the peak rate's gone up to 26 or something, so it's like double what it was before. So,
yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you know anything about this, but would you recommend, for example, solar or battery installs or anything like that as to a way of mitigating, or is it still a long payback for those things?
I think that's the challenge with those solutions right now. I just wonder if it would almost be if the tariff increases that they could be anything up to 2 years until we see rates back to anywhere near where they were before. And actually, to be honest, Miles, like the sort of rates that you probably had access to, a year ago were particularly good, and the EV tariff market. All the tariffs were like very aggressively priced, essentially because as energy suppliers were looking to grow market share, so they weren't profitable products for most energy suppliers. So it's possible we'll never see those types of rates again. However, we should see something, that looks something like that, and nothing like what we see now, but it could take a couple of years. Even if it takes a couple of years, if you're investing in a battery storage system or a solar storage system, it's usually a 5. I won't be specific.
So I just got a quote this last week from for solar and battery, and it was 6 kilowatts of solar panels on my roof, which mostly could fit, and 2 batteries. I can't remember the name of the batteries, but they were basically like 2 5-kilowatt-hour batteries. They give me like 10 kilowatt-hours of storage. Now, my house, when I'm not charging my car, uses about 11 kilowatt-hours a day. So in theory, I should be able to generate electricity during the day, enough to run my house, perhaps enough over the peak in the summer, in the middle of the day to put some in the battery. And then I can run the battery in the evening. And then hopefully, if the cheap tariffs come on overnight, I can charge the battery overnight in case it's a cloudy day the next day. And I can also charge my car at the same time. But that's sort of like £10,000 investment. Now, I suppose it's the way I'm looking at this moment is if I'm currently paying £200 a month for electricity and gas. If my tariff's going to go up to like £400 a month, that's like £200 a month I could put into financing a solar package. So I'm like this. Probably there's an awful lot of people like me as well that just don't know what's the best way to do it. I suppose worst case scenario, I'm going to have solar panels on my roof and they're going to do some good. my bills aren't going to go up as high.
I mean, I suppose it's undeniable that now is a very good time to make that investment, isn't it? Because all of a sudden the opportunity to save has just increased. It's quite a positive way to look at tariff increases, but I mean it's true. Yeah, your opportunity to reduce your bills from having like a solar and battery storage system is going to be much higher now. So I guess if you were considering that anyway before, then actually the sort of financial case for it, like you say, has only just increased. Whether or not it's a solution to take purely in response to the tariff increases, I'd probably have to, someone out there who's cleverer than me could crunch it in a spreadsheet or something like that. But yeah, it's an interesting situation.
Yeah, there's definitely some maths needs to be done. I think I need to get the spreadsheet out and sort of work out what I think I could use or whatever. But it's a challenge. Definitely, it's definitely a challenge. But I think hopefully,
watch this space, because one day we'd like to be able to make that easy. So sometime in the future, you should be able to get that information through us. But today, get the Excel out. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So at the moment, on the website, you can compare obviously the home charge points. You've got EV energy tariffs on there, which you say the difference with yours is that it incorporates the car usage. So is it adding on kilowatt hours for potentially what you're going to use in your car, or?
Yeah, exactly. And at the end of the day, it's also giving you the ability to actually compare those specialist tariffs. So the major comparison services don't yet include EV friendly tariffs in the results. But obviously, in order to do that, you also have to be then wrapping in the car to the equation. So how many kilowatt hours are you going to use in a year for your vehicle, which is like a function of how big it is and how far you drive it. And then how much of that is likely to be used at home. And then we add that into the normal stuff around how big your house is and what energy you use and where you live. And that crunches all of those numbers and gives you an estimate for annual electricity bill, but also broken down into how much of that will be for your home and how much will be for your car. And obviously just comparing all the different EV friendly tariffs for your situation.
Yeah, I think it's a good important point to put. If people haven't got an electric car yet, and they're wondering about how much it costs, these off-peak tariffs can make a startling difference, can't they? Like, for example, even with these new tariffs where it's 25 pence peak and 7.5 pence off-peak, if you're going to just charge your car overnight, that means you're only going to use the cheap electric. So the cost of charging the car isn't going to be £14; it's going to be £6 or whatever. So it's going to be drastically lower, and so it's definitely worth looking at this. I think so even if you've got your car charger already, it's worth perhaps looking at this for the electricity saving point of view. And even if if people have an older home charger that doesn't have scheduling built in, one of the good things about the new MG ZS EV facelift version is that it's got scheduling built into the car. So that then means that you can use a dumb charger in a smart way. Well, that's great. No, Charlie, thank you so much for coming on to talk to us. It's been really useful, I think, for me as much as for our viewers. And thank you. I see that you've created an account on the MGV's website. So hopefully, if I spot anything that I think you'd be able to reply to, I think I'll post it on there if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thank you very much, and good luck with this Rightcharge. It sounds like you've given it an awful lot of thought, and I think it does answer a lot of questions for people. It certainly takes some of the questions away from dealers like myself, who honestly most dealers don't know enough about EV to be able to advise. So it's really helpful to have this as a tool there for all EV owners. Thank you very much.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Miles. It's been a pleasure.
That's great. Thanks very much, Charlie.
Take care.